What's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, then welcome to our little corner of the internet. Today we're going to be watching a video titled Why Nobody Talks About This Major Texas City, which I have no idea which city we're talking about. Usually when we talk about Texas, I would think something like Houston, Dallas. So I don't know which city it will be, but without further ado, let's see what this video is about.
This is Austin, this is Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, and this is El Paso, a unique desert mountain city sitting in the southwestern tip of Texas. On paper, El Paso has top 25 US citywide population, but here in the real world, nobody really talks about El Paso, the only Texas city that didn't participate in the recent Texas Miracle, a place so far from what
I've definitely heard about El Paso before, though.
Most people think of as Texas that you could drive all the way from Kentucky to Washington, D.C. before someone in El Paso could reach San Antonio. See, El Paso is located all the way over here in a region of its very own, stretched across the US-Mexico border along the Horn of Texas. In fact, El Paso is so far removed from the core of Texas that if you were looking for the nearest state capital, Austin would be like your third best option. Santa Fe is so much closer, and depending on traffic, so is Phoenix, Arizona. That's to say, El Paso, Texas is closer to the Pacific Ocean than the Louisiana border. San Antonio is the—
It's actually really interesting to see them on the map like this because I don't know why. In my head, I didn't imagine like the Texas border going like this for some reason, and El Paso being kind of at the peak. That's interesting.
Depending on traffic, so is Phoenix, Arizona. That's to say, El Paso, Texas is closer to the Pacific Ocean than the Louisiana border. San Antonio is the nearest major Texas city, and it's an 8-hour drive through the unapologetically empty Chihuahuan Desert. But isolation isn't the only reason El Paso feels so unlike Texas. This city, Ciudad Juárez, sits just a single mile from downtown El Paso, but with about 2.5 times the population and a massive manufacturing base, making El Paso the 22nd largest city in the United States and yet the smaller part of this growing international metro. So over here you have Juárez, fast becoming one of the largest manufacturing centers in the Western Hemisphere. And over here you have the warehouse, El Paso, making the rise in nearshoring possible. They're called the Borderplex. 2.5 billion people, a single economic focus, spread across 2 countries. El Paso hasn't participated in Texas's massive population growth, and dozens of major tech businesses didn't relocate there. And yet, El Paso's economy continued to grow. It is the cowboy boot manufacturing capital of the world, it's home to the second largest football bowl game in America, and its trade volume is up 20% since just 2024. The economy is moving.
I mean, look at these houses.
And its trade volume is up 20%.
That looks like a rich neighborhood. I mean, when you see trees like this grow next to each other, aligned, I feel like that screams rich. And pools.
Since just 2024, the economy is moving and making things, while the cost of living still sits 12% below the national average, making El Paso a powerful economic hub, the only real city in all of western Texas, and home to Fort Bliss, a military installation that's bigger than the entire state of Rhode Island. See, western Texas isn't just sparsely populated, it's the regional capital of El Paso, and then it's nothing. That's 670,000 Texans living on a land island separated by hundreds of miles of primordial desert and the Franklin subrange of the Southern Rockies. It's a world apart from other notable Texas cities, places like Dallas, Houston, Austin, even San Antonio, the state's major growth cities, with booming modern economies and widespread development, making El Paso seem like less in comparison. As El Paso isn't just forgotten, it has a modest skyline, a median income that consistently lags, and a growing brain drain problem, along with brutal weather, significant inequality, and a noticeable infrastructure gap.
I feel like El Paso sounds like a perfect place to move, for example, for me, like looking from the outside in. But the only thing that would like hold me back is probably the weather. But I mean, with living prices being 12% below average and, you know, it being a growing city, I feel like it has a lot going on for it, and it seems like a very good place to live. But personally, I wouldn't put up with the weather, probably.
But while El Paso doesn't benefit from Texas Triangle proximity, it's still Texas. The low tax, the limited regulation, the business friendliness, they're all there. There's just less migration from places like California and the Northeast, no symbiotic city-to-city prosperity, and no boom in business relocations. So no, El Paso doesn't have a gigafactory. In fact, they ended up with Meta's massive data center, while Austin was busy adding tens of thousands of good-paying jobs from Apple, Tesla, and Oracle. But keep in mind, Texas is a massive state, so the more desolate western side, being far different from this highly populated eastern corridor, is to be expected. That's how the big four Texas metros make up about 2/3 of the state's total population, because that's where geography makes large-scale city building more possible. Houston sits at the Gulf, San Antonio and Austin were built along the Balcones Escarpment, and the Dallas Metroplex is situated on soft rolling plains along the Trinity River. All while El Paso sits on deserted mountainous terrain, making its significant size and economic hub status a real accomplishment. But for all its advantages, life in the prosperous Texas Triangle isn't exactly easy either. Headline numbers don't always trickle down to better opportunities for locals. The tech sector often prefers job relocations over hiring local residents, even in places like Austin, where the labor pool is legitimately advanced. Then there's the growing pains that go along with being America's fastest growing state. Living costs rise beyond belief, highways become nearly impossible, and development can be an outright nightmare. When Austin is already feeling an economic pullback, and Oracle is...
I feel like this is very typical. That happens like to a lot of countries and maybe even states, that they, start growing really, really quickly, and the state kind of leans into that growth, and then it kind of suffocates it. But I don't really see that happening in Texas as much. I mean, it depends on how like things are taken throughout the next decades, but I just feel like Texas is a place that like has a lot of space to grow, if that makes sense. So, but yeah, it's kind of like a known issue, so it's odd that there's like no better ways to kind of handle it, if that makes sense.
Nightmare. When Austin is already feeling...
That was a lot of big words, and someone has to applaud for me for that in the comments. That was, my brain was like, it was, the gears were turning.
An economic pullback, and Oracle is already headed to Nashville. Dallas's vacancy rate recently pushed past 25%, while Houston's vacancy rate is even worse. So while El Paso sits all the way over here, it works off a completely different economic engine, enjoys lower living costs, and a completely different kind of demographic strain, specifically the exit of working-age locals chasing better opportunities in places like Austin and Dallas-Fort Worth. Real problems that have led El Paso to its first population decline in 75 years. But that distance is also an anchor that's kept the city's fiscal output in the positive, made it critical to US-Mexico logistics and warehousing, and shielded it from the painfully high housing inflation that's already hammered affordability in the Texas Triangle. Meaning that El Paso wasn't just left out of the wins, it's shielded by hundreds of miles from the losses, and that's really the whole point. El Paso has built something completely different not just in the state of Texas, but across the United States, with a citywide population that leads real big cities like Denver, Nashville, and Boston, but a topographic reality that's left little room for outward growth. There's just so many ways you can look at it. 680,000 people is a lot, it really is. But when there's little in the way of suburban sprawl, your marketplace sits far below any citywide top-line statistic. But as an international metro, El Paso and Juarez benefit from one another through a substantial rise in nearshore manufacturing and over-the-border logistics transport, bringing hundreds of factories to this side of the border and 80 million square feet of warehousing over here. The footprint, the economic power, can be massive nonetheless. But whatever chapter comes next for Texas, whether it's another Sunbelt region boom cycle or a continuation of this current slowdown, it's going to be felt throughout the Texas Triangle, but not so much over here in El Paso, the Texas city nobody seems to mention. This is
Interesting. So El Paso is kind of like separate from the other city, which makes sense geographically, but I don't know. But I definitely have heard about El Paso before. I think we've even made a video on it. And yeah, it honestly seems like a perfect place to live. Apart from it maybe being like, you know, secluded and of like some issues that I just don't see them really as like any huge issues. So it's yeah, odd that it's not more talked about, but kind of makes sense since, like, you know, the middle cities are taking the protagonism. Wow, I'm using a lot of pickle words. I don't know where they're coming from, guys. Thank you for joining me for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know if you've been to El Paso before. What are your thoughts on this? Leave a like, subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you guys in the next video.